Welcome to the Tribal Data Tools demonstration. For this demonstration, we will be going over the Data Discovery tool, which is the first of a set of 2 assessment tools that you will use to help determine the quality of waters on your reservation. The second tool in this series is the Data Analysis tool, which is where you actually apply your criteria. But to get started, you'll want to open the Water Quality Portal Data Discovery tool final with DAT. You were given this at the pilot training. If you haven't already, make sure to extract the zip file in your folder. So for example, you may see the tool in a zip file such as the one below. If you don't already have a folder within this jump drive, you want to make sure that you have extracted into this folder. That may take a while, so you may want to pause this video and come back to it once you've extracted it. Once the data tool is extracted, you want to go ahead and open the file that isn't a zip file. It's a normal file. It doesn't look like this one. It looks like this one, the extracted version. So you go ahead and open the tool. The tool contains a version of R Portable, which is really just the software that you're using to run the tool. So you can simply click on the Data Discovery Tool .bat file, batch file, and it'll launch the tool into your browser. Occasionally, the tool will launch into other browsers other than Internet Explorer or Chrome. If it does do that, simply copy the URL and paste it into an Internet Explorer or a Chrome browser, okay? Because it will run better that way. So here is the data query for the Data Discovery tool. This is where you're going to determine the data set that you want to analyze. So in many situations, you will want to analyze data that is not only your own. So you want to be able to look at what data USGS has provided, or your neighboring state or tribe, to be able to also use that information to help derive a decision for the water quality on your reservation. If that is the case, you're going to want to use the location selection query. So for example, you'll want to make sure you get all the counties that your reservation sits in. That'll return all the data for the whole county, including, like I said, USGS or other collecting organizations. That would be, you can also do a point location and a distance from the point, and or a bounding box, so a north, a south, and east and west bounding box to get an area for how you want that data to return, and or your HUCs in which your tribe sits in, so you can have the hydrologic unit code by returning the data that USGS might collect as well. And that's highly encouraged. For the use of this demo, I will not do that for simplicity purposes, but definitely explore that. The second thing you are able to query by is the sampling parameters. And this is important because you will want to determine a date range. So some folks decide to analyze their data on a yearly basis for their assessment reports. However, it is also encouraged to use longer data sets, because the more data sets you have, or data you have to support your decision, the more robust that decision is. And so, for example, you may want to use the last 2 years of data to make your assessment. So I'm going to say I want to use, I want to go all the way back to 2015. I'm using the navigator, but you can simply type in the date range as it shows below. For the tribe I'm using for demo purposes, it's going to be October 1st of 2015 to October 1st of 2017. That's 2 years. You can also look up sample media types, water, or characteristic groups if you want to do a specific assessment. But if you want to do the assessment for all of your data that has numeric criteria, I would keep those fields blank. If you scroll down into site parameters, you can also query data by your organization. So I'm going to use Pueblo Tesuque. I accidentally cleared it out. Tesuke. And I can just search by my tribal name, and I can select it. It'll populate below. And I can select outside the box, and it's still sitting there in the query. Okay, so make sure you select it, and then select outside the box to ensure that it has been selected. So we have a date range of 2 years, and we have an organization. And then now you go ahead and you hit Retrieve Data. The first thing the tool does is it goes to the water quality portal, which is where your data is from submitting data through WQX, and it checks counts. So it wants to say, well, how many stations meet your query parameters and how many records. And this is normal. This is 7 stations, over 1,400 records, which is what I expected for this query. So I'm going to go ahead and say import data. If you're querying the portal with the tool, and you find that that record count is off or you don't have any data, this is due to the way your data is submitted and or the query that you inputted. So, for example, maybe your data isn't in the water quality portal. So sometimes if you tag your data as preliminary in WQX, it won't come out of the portal because it's not a final data set. So if you're working with someone to help submit your data, make sure to explore that because otherwise you can't utilize the tool. Secondly is your queries, the query parameters that you put in the background. So for example, things that may be conflicting is you might have put a HUC in that was your reservation, but if you put the state that wasn't your state, those two query parameters would conflict and it would return no data. So you want to make sure that the HUCs you're pulling match perhaps the organization you're pulling and or the state. So just take a look at your query parameters and make sure those are all correct, and then explore the data submission issues, potential data submission issues. You'll see that it just said the data import is complete. I did not select import data again because every time you select import data again, it tries to pull the data set back again. And so it's just going to take you longer. So just push it once, know that it's working, and then it may just take a few minutes depending on how large your data set is or how advanced your query was. So just like the tool says, go ahead and hit close and navigate to the Check Data tab. The Check Data tab is really nice in that it tells you some summary information about your data set. So once again, it let me know that I have over 1,400 records. That's 7 stations. But it also let me know I have 8 parameters, so 8 specific things that I sample at that location. The one most important thing that I find on the Check Data tab is the what to do with non-detects. So when you have a value that is below a detection limit reported from a lab, and it can't be found, you're going to want to tell the tool what you want to do with that value. And the reason is when it starts to do averages, minimums, maximums, number of exceedances, it will kick that data set out unless you tell it, or that value, unless you tell it what to do. So some of the radio buttons listed here are the common ways. Setting it equal to 0, which is not necessarily encouraged. We would encourage you rather to do equal to the limit of detection or half of the limit of detection. Neither of those are usually exceedances. Usually the detection limit is below the threshold you would use to assess that information, but make sure you know that about each of the parameters that you select. For the use of this demo, I'm just going to say that I want to equal it to half the times the detection. And as you navigate through the Check Data tabs, you can see that, let me scroll back up, you can see that, well, there wasn't any non-detects in this data set because it was physical chemical data, but you would be able to see what was done with those non-detects. You'd be able to see if there was any data without units, but this data set's very clean, so we don't have to worry about that. There's no data without methods or duplicates. You can see all of that information. And then the Filter Data tab is essentially what you have done to the data set based on these other tabs. So if the data set wasn't clean and I was making decisions along that route, the Filter Data set would represent what I had done with the non-detects, etc. You can save that data set if you want to keep track of it. And then the summary, I love this feature in that you can hit summarize data and you can get those min, maxes, and averages as I described, and the counts of the data per station, by water type, and by characteristic, which is very interesting information. You'll want to next navigate over to the View Data tab. The View Data tab is where you can filter down your data set even more. So in the situations where you probably have USGS data or other county data in your data set, you're going to want to use this filtered data set, these data filters to narrow that data set down to exactly what you want to analyze. So for example, if you had USGS data, it would also be here in the organization. I selected an organization in my query, but if you hadn't selected an organization, all the organizations that met your query parameters would come up. You could filter by station, which you would likely use a lot if you're using other people's data, because you would be able to see it on the map and you would say, oh, well, technically this one doesn't apply to my waters. And so you could select it, and you see that that's MS07AR. So let's just scroll down. It's called Pueblo of Tesuque MS, or what do we call it? Aspen Branch. So essentially, if I didn't want that one in my query, I could select it out. So you would just select this button and backspace it there. Okay, so that would get rid of that station out of your data set. I'm going to add that back in though, for the use of this. You can also do filter by sample media. So some of those other organizations may have biological data or soil data that you're not interested in analyzing. So you could select those out as well. Parameters. So let's say I don't want barometric pressure. So barometric pressure is an informative measurement, but it's not one that I have a threshold for. So I'm going to actually delete that out of my data set. Similarly, I don't let's say I have thresholds for the rest of these. I'm just going to leave those as is. And you could filter by units, methods, or result qualifiers, or even values or date ranges. So if you hadn't used date ranges previously within your query, you could do that as well. So now, once I've narrowed down my data set, I can hit submit, and that'll apply those filters that I just created. And to view a little bit more about that data, now that I've applied those filters, I want to select a station. So to select a station, you click on one of the stations, and then you make sure you hit select this location. Otherwise, when you navigate to the other tabs, it will not work. The first is a table, a complete table of all the data sets that you have, all the data sets that meet your query, your check data filters, and then the data filters here, right? So this is the data set you're currently working from. So it's at this point, I'm going to say that I'm happy with this data set, and I'm going to hit Save Data. This may save to your downloads. If it does, go ahead and navigate over there and find it later. But for my purposes, I'm going to hit Save As. I want to make sure I know where that data set is going. I'm going to bring it over to here. I'm going to say filtered, final filtered data. So I have saved that because I'm going to use that in the data analysis tool, because this is the data set that's going to feed into my assessment. Now I can go, since I selected that station, whatever that station was named, it was Rio. So if I jump over to Station Summary, I will see the station summary for Rio. You can see that the naming convention popped up here. I can see the distribution of those parameters. There's no barometric pressure in this pie chart, and that's because I took it out of the filter over here. So as a reminder, we filtered that data set out, so I can see that I have 22 turbidity results, 28 dissolved, total dissolved solids, etc. And then you can scroll down, and if you want to regenerate that pie chart without flow, you can select it here and delete it out, just like we did previously. It's that easy. And then if you scroll down, you can also see the frequency distribution of sampling. So you can see that I did a lot of sampling during the recreation year in 2016, same thing for 2017, but I likely had a space around the holidays that I didn't sample, which is probably pretty normal because of, no one's recreating at that time, etc. And you can go over to the parameter unit summary. And this is an opportunity for you to see multiple data sets plotted against each other at one time. So you can see 3 parameters for my time period. So I'm going to scroll down. I can see my turbidity values and what those recordings were. I can see my total dissolved solids and my dissolved oxygen. But let's say I really don't want to see my dissolved solids, but I would rather see my temperature. So the chart will redraw, and then my temperature will now be there. Similarly, you look on the side, you can see which y-axis is being presented. So you can see that the dissolved oxygen, which is in yellow here, is being plotted against this axis, whereas the temperature is being plotted on this one, and then your turbidity is using this one, because you can see they're all different numbers. Right? Because that's when you plot 3 parameters against each other, they're all going to need their own y-axis because they're all going to have different ranges. But it does a good job of showing the trends together. And you can export this chart for any reason if you're interested. You can do it as a different images or a PDF document. And that is the data discovery tool. So make sure that once you have narrowed down the data set using the data filters, the check data tab in your query, that you save this table. You're going to want to use this data for the next exercise for the data analysis tool. Thanks.